Okay, Tony, we're making the DVD about Bill Norton's life in Bolton,
Yeah,
and we're interviewing a range of people who've had similar experiences to him in their lives. Obviously, a bit later than him because
a lot later.
he would have been 107, I think, if he'd still been alive.
Yeah.
So, are you happy to be interviewed for
I
this?
certainly am.
Okay. So, just start off with say who you are and where you're from.
Tony Janicki, currently live in Harwood. I have lived up Halliwell, Bromley Cross and Chorley New Road.
Okay. Just to begin with, Tony, could you say where you were born and brought up as a child?
Yeah. I was born in Townleys, as it was then known as, Bolton General. Mum used to live with her parents in Rossthorne Street, and it's still there, number 47. At the time, it was 1942, my mum's second sister was away in the Women's Royal Air Force, and her third sister, I think she was stationed somewhere with the ATC. So in the two up and down house, there was my grandma and grandfather, my mother, two sisters, a brother, and myself. Apparently I used to sleep in the second drawer down of a chest of drawers in the rear bedroom, which was ours. Most of the others slept downstairs under the table and in the kitchen. We moved into Croft Place, which isn't there anymore, but used to be off Liverpool Street, which was about, where the junction of Highbridge Street and Blackburn Road was, up from Knott's Chemist. We moved into number 1 Croft Place. I must have been about 3, so it would be about 1945. Again, it was a 2 up and 2 down. Flag floors right through the ground floor, outside toilet at the back, air raid shelter, a terrace of about 6 houses in a fairly rough area, I would say, yeah, and very utilitarian built. I can remember my brother and I were in the back bedroom of the upstairs, and it was a single brick wall between ourselves and next door, because one of the bricks was loose, and we used to exchange comics with the kids next door through this brick. They had more than we did. I mean, there was only 2 boys in our house, but next door were the Whittams, and I think they had 4 boys and 3 girls in a 2 up and 2 down. So I don't know how they managed. And that seemed to be the scenario for nearly all the streets thereabouts. On our block, there was just in foreigners. My father was Polish. He'd come over in 39, and after the war, he'd been an aircraft fitter, working on mosquitoes and mainly fighter aircraft. But after the war, he couldn't get a job, so he'd finished up working in the coal mines. The only other foreigner in that area was second house from the end of our block, where it was a Ukraine. No, I can't remember his pedigree, where he'd come from, but he was just a man and wife, and they kept themselves strictly to themselves.
Can you say why you think your dad couldn't get a job? Because as a fitter on mosquitoes and Mustangs, I believe.
Yeah, it was.
Top of the range. It was cutting edge.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was. I don't know whether you call it racism or whatever you like to call it, but it was totally discriminatory. All the jobs were going for Brits, and he was bottom of the pecking order. And the only job that he could actually get was a job in the mines. And it wasn't even a local pit. I mean, he finished up working at Astley Green, which was 2 bus rides away. no idea why he finished up at Astley Green, because there were a lot closer, bigger pits, but that's where he finished up. Yeah.
So, what did you think about his work? Did you have any idea of his work?
Yeah, I went in with him. It was quite. I think he liked a pint or two, and my mother was very protective about him when he picked his wages up. So on a Friday, often we would go along to the coal mine and pick up the wages if he was, dependent on which shift he was on. So I did make that trip quite a few times. But I think because of the way we were living, most of the bills seemed to go out on a Friday. And I can remember the rent collector. The rents were always due on a Friday, and that was always an issue. So we had to make sure that we had enough money in the house on a Friday when he came round to collect the rents, which was one of the main reasons that we had to have the money there on a Friday. But there were other bills. I don't know if we paid the utilities weekly then. We didn't have electricity actually in the house when we first moved in. I'm pretty certain all we had was gas. And I don't know if that was something that was paid weekly, because I can't remember. There must have been a meter in the house, but maybe we fed it weekly or something like that. I can't remember. Yeah, but it was quite important that we had cash in the house on a Friday.
So tell us, were you aware that you were poor, or was it just life? I mean, give us examples of what you remember about.
Well, the way we lived, I wore clogs until I was 11, until I went to secondary school. And it was only in the last couple of years that I was, before I went to secondary school, that I actually had rubbers on my clogs and not irons. And my mother made all our clothes. Even after I'd gone to secondary school, she still used to make my shirts and trousers. But prior to that, she made everything, literally everything. And I think that did make me aware of the fact that we didn't have a lot of money. We never had holidays at all. We had odd days in the Wakes weeks where we actually had a day at Southport or a day at Blackpool, and that's literally all we had, odd days. The first time I went away on holiday, if you want to call it that, was with the Church Lads Brigade. I would be 9, and the Church Lads Brigade battalion in Bolton used to put on a camp somewhere for the whole of Bolton Wakes weeks. And the battalion would get a train, a full train, that they would organise, and the whole battalion would go off for a week, for a fortnight. I can remember we went down to, the first one I did, we went down to Abergele, just south of Rill, on the train. And we slept in tents on wooden boards with palliasses, which we filled ourselves with straw, and they supplied blankets. So, and we really struggled to pay for that. I can remember that being quite a thing. I did all kinds of odd jobs to bring in extra money, delivered the papers, worked for local shops, errands and stuff like that. So, yeah, I was quite aware that we didn't have a lot of money.
Could you tell us a story about jam jars and going to the pictures? Start from the beginning.
Right. There were quite a few local cinemas. There was the Mount on Mount Street, the Rialto at the junction of Blackburn Road and Waterloo Street. Oh, memory's failing me now. There was one on Higher Bridge Street, and I can't remember the name of it. That was our favourite cinema on Higher Bridge Street. No.
Say the Palladium.
It was the Palladium, yes, which became the Wrighton Wrestling Stadium. And because you got money back on jam jars and milk bottles and the like, I used to save up the jam jars and milk bottles. And I think entrance into the Palladium on a Saturday morning was something like 3p. And I think we used to get half an halfpenny or a farthing. No, I think we got an halfpenny for jam jars and milk bottles. So I used to save them all up. I'd collect and raid dustbins even to get the jam jars together, take them back to the shop, and that would pay for the sessions at the Palladium, because they were the highlight of the week, without a doubt. The Westerns and Flash Gordon and the Mudmen, they were the bee's knees.
Can we go back to your father being an immigrant?
Yeah.
Which is what he was.
Yeah.
Can you remember any detail about the impact of that on your family, on him, on you, on your mother?
We did have issues because mother was classed as an alien initially once she married Dad.
Sorry, Tony, could you start off? My dad was Polish.
Oh yeah, right. My dad was Polish. He arrived in the UK in 1939. He'd actually started his journey. He was in the east of Poland, and when the Germans invaded Poland from the west, the Russians moved in from the east. He finished up in a prisoner of war camp. Even though they weren't at war with the Russians, they got all the young men and all the adult males into a camp. Don't know how long they were in this camp, but there was a mass breakout, and apparently a Russian guard was killed, and he made his way south to the Mediterranean through Hungary and Greece. They caught a ship from Greece over to Alexandria, a ship from Alexandria into Marseille. And in Marseille, they were offered the choice of either staying and fighting with the Free French or going over to the UK and joining the division that had been set up by one of the Polish generals for the RAF. And he chose to come over to the UK. I think he really, really enjoyed his time in the RAF. And he obviously was very good at his trade, because I think he finished up as a sergeant or something like that. Met my mother during his R&R in Blackpool. My mother was in Blackpool with her youngest sister just for the day. Happened to bump into each other and finished up writing to each other from there on in, and I think they met quite a few times while he was there on his R&R. Must have been a commonplace, which I found strange at first, because my dad was based in Scotland originally for quite a while. So whether they shipped them down to Blackpool or not, I don't know. Maybe that was a thing that they did. In Croft Place, it was difficult because the kids always ragged us because my dad's English was obviously not very good, and we were classed as foreigners, aliens basically, and it was a bit of a struggle. There was always, not always, but the regular fights with other kids just to maintain your place in the pecking order because of the background. And it was the same when my brother was growing up. I got involved in a lot of issues sort of protecting him, which went on, I would think, probably 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years maybe, until I was at least 7 or 8. It did tail off once we got to junior school. And it only happened rarely then, I think, because there was a few more foreigners coming in round about that time. And I don't know, I can't remember why, but we actually got our first coloured people came into school at St Matthew's around about that time. So I think the focus probably changed a little bit because there were odd coloured people coming in, and they were recognisable foreigners, and they started taking the brunt of that sort of discrimination, if you like. Yeah.
Okay, Tony. You talked about Croft Place.
Yeah.
And the brick in the wall. Could you tell us what it was like for your family when you moved into a council house?
Oh, yeah.
What year was it? And
Yeah. I mentioned the fact that I went away with the Church Lads Brigade. I did the first one, like I say, was at Abergele. I then, in 1954, I went to one in the Isle of Man, which was like going abroad. Parents had never said anything about it, but when we came back from the 2 weeks away, they picked me up at the station at Great Moor Street and said, "We've moved house." Right. We finished up. It was number 4, Croft Place. Was it number 4 or number 5? Second house in Croft Place. Not in Croft Place, Kentmere Road. Brand new council house. So while I was away that fortnight, we finished up in this brand new council house. We'd recently had an addition to the family. Len, 1954, Len would have been about 3. No, he was 2. And I think that was the reason we'd got some priority in terms of getting a council house. Brand new, nothing else around it, where there was 1 row of council houses, 2 rows of council houses behind us towards town, and in front of us just fields. At the end of the road eventually was Within School, but at that time there was absolutely nothing there. And it was amazing. We actually had a bathroom, which we'd never had before, an indoor toilet. It was just totally changed. It had a gas fire. We'd only had coal fires before, and a garden. We'd only had the backyard and a bomb shelter. And it was amazing, the difference, because one of the things that really stood out at Croft Place was the fact that originally we had a tin bath that we used in the kitchen for baths. Obviously, as we were getting bigger, you couldn't just fill it with water because we'd nowhere to heat the water. And we used to use Moth Street baths. They had a setup called slipper baths, where you had a great big bath, and for something like sixpence, the 3 of us, my dad, Malcolm and myself, would go for a bath. You could have water as deep as you liked. Phenomenal. Warm water. You'd get a towel, a block of soap, and you could be in there for about half an hour. It was just superb. And then we had the same facilities on Kentmere Road. We actually had a bath, something that we'd never had before. So it really was different. The fact that we had a garden. Dad was delighted that we had a garden because he'd come from a farming background in Poland, and he just wanted to get it turned over and get potatoes in and vegetables and the like. And it was just so, it was good. A real major difference, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cough. I think that's it, Tony.
That's fine.